Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Thursday, the 18th of April. Thanks for joining us again. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. And you can find us online as well at weather.gov/Alaska. From there, you can jump to your local weather forecast, satellite or radar images in your part of the state. And of course, check on the Alaska River Forecast Center's breakup conditions across the region. We'll get to that in just a minute with a new update for you, but first we want to touch on winter weather advisories that are posted for the upper Koyukuk tonight and also across the Bering Strait into St. Lawrence Island, so the western end of the Seward Peninsula and into St. Lawrence Island for Gamble and Savunga. Primarily concerned with blowing snow. That'll go through the evening hours and it should diminish as we get into early tomorrow morning, so the good news is the weather should be improving as you're watching already. But we expect visibility at least through the evening hours to maybe approach that half-mile point there where things get a little bit dangerous there. So just make sure you know where you're going. Make sure someone knows that you're coming there and certainly that you've reached your destination, and keep you and yours safe through the rest of the evening there before the weather improves. Now, as I said, it is breakup season, and as we were talking about yesterday, we have an update from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. Let's send it over to Crane Johnson with this week's information.
Hello, this is Crane Johnson with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, bringing you an update to the 2019 Alaska Spring Breakup Outlook. One thing we wanted to lead off with again today is that think ice safety. We know that this year is different than previous years, and so as you and your friends and family head out, think about ice safety. We've had reports of thin ice throughout the state, and we expect those to continue. When we look at breakup throughout the state of Alaska, three main components we look at. The first is snowpack. On your left is a snowpack map for the state of Alaska, and what it shows is that in the southern and eastern portions of Alaska, we've got a generally below average snowpack, and then in southeast we've got a well below average snowpack. If we look to the northwest, one highlight is a near record snowpack in the Koyukuk River Valley, and then in areas of the North Slope and in northwest where there isn't much data, we expect above average or well above average snowpacks. If we look to the east, the headwaters of the Yukon River, we can see that the Yukon Territorial Governance map shows a below average or well below average snowpack throughout the upper headwaters of the Yukon River watershed, with one exception being the Porcupine River watershed, which has a near normal snowpack. The Porcupine River drains into the Yukon River at Fort Yukon. The next thing we look at are ice thicknesses throughout the state. This is a accumulated freezing degree day map for the state of Alaska, and we can see throughout the state the general trend has been a below average number of accumulated freezing degree days, which we would expect to correlate with thin ice. And that matches with anecdotal information, ice thickness measurements, and reports from throughout the state that indicate the ice is both thinner than normal and weaker than normal. We can see that Bethel only had 53% of their accumulated freezing degree days this year. Once again, just think ice safety. Even with the cooler temperatures, the ice has already lost its strength and we don't expect it to get any stronger. We just came out of a record warm March with areas north of the Alaska Range and north of Bristol Bay recording their warmest March on record. If we look at the first 2 weeks of April, this trend has continued with many parts, with almost everywhere in mainland Alaska recording a warmer than average first 2 weeks of April. Bethel was 11 degrees warmer than average up through April 15th. If we look into the future, the forecast from April 18th through April 23rd, we can see that we expect below average temperatures through the southwest and western parts of Alaska, and then above average temperatures through the interior to the northeast parts of Alaska. And this trend continues through the end of April with likelihood of cooler than normal temperatures throughout many parts of the state, with a return to normal or the likelihood of above normal temperatures in May. When we pull together those three components and look at the flood threat potential throughout the state of Alaska, even with the cooler temperatures now through the end of May, those warm temperatures in March and April led to the melting of snow at low elevations and also the melting of snow on top of our rivers, weakening the ice. So we think the general trend will be towards a more thermal breakup with fewer ice jams expected. Throughout the state of Alaska, we expect the flood threat is lower than normal, with the exception being the Koyukuk River Valley and the North Slope rivers, where we have a heavier than normal snowpack. And the flood threat there is near normal for those regions. If we look at breakup timing, it's unusual for this time of year to actually have breakup already started through the state. We've got Dehne that broke up on April 14th. That was the earliest on record. Nikolai broke up on March 31st. That's the earliest on record for that location. And Bethel broke up on April 14th, which is the earliest on record for that location. The general trend through southwest Alaska we expect to continue with a slight pause due to the cooler temperatures, but we still expect breakup to be on the order of 1 to 3 weeks early through southern and southwest parts of Alaska. And then as we look to the northeast, we expect breakup to be on the order of 5 to 10 days early. Shifted a bit towards May with the cooler temperatures, but still early on average throughout the state of Alaska. If we look at our Alaska breakup map for Thursday, April 18th, we can see that the Kuskokwim River is basically open from the mouth of the Kuskokwim all the way up through AKwx. Some open areas in the middle Kuskokwim, and then the Stony River is mostly open throughout its entire length. The Susitna Valley, the Squentna and the Yetna River have broken up, and most of the Susitna River has broken up with ice still remaining just at the mouth of the Susitna River. The Copper River watershed is some open throughout its entire watershed. And then if we look to the Tanana River watershed, we've got some open areas and mostly open areas throughout the entire Tanana River watershed. The Yukon is basically ice covered all the way from the mouth up through Eagle. And then if we look to the northern rivers and northwest, they're all still ice covered at this time. For daily updates, you can always check back at our website, www.weather.gov/APRFC.
Thanks, Crane. On to fire weather now. No significant change from yesterday. The weather pattern is not really supporting a lot of fire danger at this time, so really good news there. As we look at the satellite picture for today, you can see a broad area of low pressure across the northern Gulf. Some of that has moved a wave into the eastern interior and continues to bring in a lot of wind across southeast with periods of rain and certainly some strong winds there. We've seen many people posting pictures of windy conditions there around Juneau today. Around central and eastern sections of the interior, an awful lot of cloud cover there. And then, of course, we have the northerly flow working down the west coast. As that continues to work its way into low pressure in the Gulf, that is bringing in a lot of cold air here. So we have new ice growth to talk about. We'll see the new map here coming up in the marine segment in just a little bit. Notice, though, in the meantime, areas around the Aleutian Chain and the Alaska Peninsula not really seeing a whole lot of wind. In fact, generally drier and more stable conditions and slower wind for the next couple days, as well as high pressure setting up across the western Bering, really trying to keep things generally calm. It doesn't speak a whole lot to the low visibility or stratus that's probably in your area, but generally calmer conditions than having a low parked on your back step. Here's a look at the weather map then. Low pressure sitting across the northern Gulf at 1,018 millibars, sitting there with a trough of low pressure now, the remnants of a cold front across the north and eastern Gulf. That's keeping rainfall focused in on your area. Another front sitting right across the Alaska Range that's helping to keep rain and snow focused around Prince William Sound and South Central. Hit and miss areas of generally light snowfall. Some of that's moving out and away from the Fairbanks area, but all around this is wraparound cold air. And each one of these lines, or black lines, is a trough of low pressure, signaling another disturbance capable of producing some snow showers. As we head into tonight, a general area of light snow showers will be found across the interior. Watch for areas of light snow and poor visibility at times across the North Slope. Our winter weather advisories will gradually diminish and be allowed to expire, I think, across the upper Koyukuk Valley and across the Bering Strait communities. There will still be some areas of blowing snow, but we don't expect the worst of that to be over the same areas as we go through the rest of tonight. Snow showers across southwest, stretching all the way across the Pribilofs to the central chain. Out ahead of this wave, we expect warm and wet air to mix in with the snowfall, so we do expect rain and snow possibly around the Prince William Sound region into the Kenai Peninsula at times. And snowfall for Anchorage and the road system once again, maybe another inch or two in the region. Above 1,000 feet, though, that could stretch up from 2 to 5 inches of snow, so there is still more to come there for South Central. And southeast, we expect generally rain. Isobars are relaxing their grip on southeast, so as they spread apart a little bit more, the winds can relax, just as you get into a broader area of a river or a stream. Around Friday, we expect to see high pressure sitting across the northern Gulf, 1,031 millibars there. You can see another surge of warmer air trying to develop across the southern Gulf. Spotty areas of rain showers are focused, of course, across southeast. Areas of rain and snow mixed in Prince William Sound. A generally slightly drier day for the Cook Inlet region, but snow showers continue around a very unsettled weather pattern for the interior. The North Slope, areas of low clouds and some spotty snowfall there, and snow showers across south and west with low pressure hovering close to St. Lawrence Island. And again, a developing ridge here across the east. That shrinks off to the east on Saturday. Low pressure is back in the northern Gulf at 993 millibars. The front moving north and east once again. The winds are tightening up across north and eastern parts of the Gulf. That means more wind for southeast, more wind for Yakutat, Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, and Kodiak Island. So watch for those changes there, especially if you have plans to head out. Snow showers will be back around Cook Inlet, especially across the higher terrain of the Chugach into the Talkeetnas and certainly into the Wrangell-St. Elias region. Keep an eye on Juneau's weather, especially around the Lynn Canal and out toward Gustavus there as your weather will be changing. Let's take a look at the temperatures for tomorrow morning quickly. Generally above freezing for southeast as you start your day. Lower to mid-30s around south central Prince William Sound, 31 around Kodiak, the Middle Tanana Valley, just a hair below freezing at 29, 20 in Fort Yukon. Single-digit temperatures for most of the North Slope, Wainwright 1 below. Kotzebue Sound temperatures probably about 5 to 10 above, 9 in Nome, 12 for Gamble and Savunga. Teens for most of the YK Delta upriver into places like McGrath. You're talking about temps closer to 20, 16 in Galena, Dillingham, King Salmon in the lower 20s, and 20s and 30s for Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, and most of the Alaska Peninsula, with high temperatures tomorrow in St. Paul, 32, 26 in Macoriac. Teens for many in the Beaufort Seacoast, a little bit colder down the Chukchi line. Mid to upper 30s for most of the interior, Ambler and Bettles in the 20s to 30s there. Looks like North Pole and Fairbanks in the lower 40s, 44 in Eagle, in fact, and just a little bit above freezing for South Central. Kodiak closer to 39.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to your aviation weather now. IFR conditions will linger across the Alaska Range and into the Tanita Pass area and Prince William Sound. East of that, into the higher terrain around southeastern Alaska. Lower terrain at least will be MVFR. You'll probably see some areas of IFR, especially around the northern entrances and through the capital city and through some coastal areas of the Inside Passage, mainly on the eastern side, as low pressure is pushing air up into that higher terrain. Now on the west side, you're going to be a lot more likely to see at least some patches of VFR conditions, that in the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, the Koyukuk Valley, into parts of Norton Sound. And southward, most of the Alaska Peninsula and the chain will remain under MVFR, but watch for some holes, though, around southern parts of Cook Inlet into Kodiak Island, again, as the main forcing with this low pressure system is going to be on the eastern half of the interior, south central, and southeastern Alaska. So once again, we get a widespread area of VFR conditions for the upper Koyukuk, Noatak and Kobuk valleys, Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island included. But for the Pribilof southward, it's all MVFR, and that includes the Kuskokwim Valley and parts of the lower Yukon Valley as well. Areas in the eastern Brooks Range will likely experience IFR throughout Friday night, and really the same old places on Saturday morning. Not a big change for Saturday morning, in fact, as you get into the early part of the weekend. We're still looking at that low pressure system just kind of hovering right here in the Gulf. So MVFR is still fairly widespread across southeast, and IFR across the Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, the Alaska Range, and maybe some VFR developing in the southern parts of Cook Inlet out toward northern ends of Kodiak Island. By Saturday afternoon, that changes back to IFR conditions there as convection gets rolling up again, probably seeing widespread precipitation across northern and western sections of the Gulf and along the Alaska Range. We'll still look for that sweet spot there across the eastern Brooks Range for IFR. Otherwise, MVFR all the way down the Yukon Valley. The upper Koyukuk still looking pretty good. Kobuk and Noatak Valley is looking good. Seward Peninsula, A-OK. Southern parts of the Bering, though, and the Aleutians still looking at MVFR, including St. Paul and St. George. Then your pass conditions now for Friday. It looks like marginal weather to VFR as the day goes on. Same goes for Adigan Pass. We'll start out with MVFR, but it looks like visual flight rules should be back by the afternoon for Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass holding at MVFR really most of the day. We'll see Rainy Pass and also Isabel Pass and Windy Pass probably holding around IFR at least for a good part of the day for Windy Pass and for Isabel Pass. So it's going to be a little trickier going into those northern entrances thanks to that southerly flow coming into the region. Mentasta Pass looks like we're going to hold at IFR out east, and for Tanita Pass as well. Portage Pass looking to be down for most of your Friday. Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to be at least IFR. Some changes there as we go into Saturday. Freezing levels, no big change from yesterday. In fact, that warm air that we were looking at down around southern parts of southeast might have actually creeped further south just a little bit. The 2,000-foot freezing line hovering right over Haida Gwaii. The surface freezing line around the Gulf Coast hovers just around, let's say, Sand Point to just about Kiska and south of St. Paul and St. George. Icing potential certainly present. We have a lot of moisture over the state right now. The trick is where is that freezing level? And around the Gulf Coast, from Juneau, let's say, out toward Cordova, it is above 7,000 feet. But the further north you go, we start to run into more cold air. So below 6,000 feet around McGrath to the North Slope, about 9,000 to 10,000 feet. So this entire area here, that entire column could at least support some isolated moderate icing potential. It's a little bit higher up here across the Gulf Coast. The jet stream has low pressure sitting out across the Chukchi Sea in a very broad area of control across the interior and southwestern Alaska. Wind speeds there on the south side of that, not terribly strong, 75 knots, 80 knots coming into southeastern Alaska. The main corridor of active weather is still to the south thanks to high pressure forcing that further south into the central Pacific, 100 to 120 knots there where that main storm path is. At 9,000 feet, southerly winds are taking over the interior and the Gulf Coast. Wind speeds there coming inland 25 to 40 knots, 30 knots or so across southeast. They're very slow across the central and eastern interior. Forget that. That's 15 knots, not 51. And northwesterlies coming in across the Bering Sea anywhere from 20 to 40 knots. A very similar pattern here at 3,000 feet. Northerlies through the Bering Strait, 10 to 15. South and westerlies across the south central coastline. Light westerly onshore winds at 20 knots there for southeast. And very light winds wrapping around low pressure out across northwestern parts of the state. These are only around 10 knots or so, so wind speeds are pretty light at most levels. Turbulence then should be expected to be somewhat minimal, and it is around the Copper River Basin, maybe some gusts and some isolated moderate there below 4,000 feet, and also around Kodiak Island, the Barren Islands, and perhaps as far north as Homer tomorrow for just a little bit of isolated moderate. More weather for you in just a few.
Lunar Leapfrog with Jupiter and Saturn. Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky.
If your favorite planets are Jupiter and Saturn, have we got a show for you?
That's right, James. Jupiter and Saturn will play leapfrog with the moon next week.
And we'll show you when and where to look for them. Okay, we have our skies set for an hour before sunrise, Sunday morning, April 21st. If you look toward the south, you'll see 3 bright objects in the sky. The brightest, of course, is the moon.
On April 21st, the moon will be in the waning gibbous phase in the constellation Libra, the Scales.
The next brightest object in the sky is Jupiter. It will be to the left of the moon, and it will shine with a bright, steady white light.
Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system and makes up over 75% of the solar system's planetary mass.
Jupiter has been observed in the sky since antiquity. The ancient Romans named it after their king of the gods, whom the Greeks referred to as Zeus.
Babylonian astronomers have records of Jupiter dating back to the 7th century BC. And in his book, The Almagest, Greek astronomer Claudius Ptolemy used Jupiter's motion with respect to the Earth to refine his Earth-centered model of the solar system.
By doing this, Ptolemy showed that Jupiter took almost 12 years to make a complete circuit of the sky, which we now know as the amount of time it takes for Jupiter to orbit the Sun.
In 1610, Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei studied Jupiter using a telescope and moons of Jupiter, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. The motions of these moons around Jupiter provided Galileo with an example supporting Nicholas Copernicus's view of a sun-centered solar system. The third bright object in the southern sky will be Saturn. Saturn was named after Jupiter's father, the Roman god of agriculture. Saturn is so large that if it were hollow, you could put 750 Earths inside it.
Aside from its beautiful rings, astronomers discovered something else interesting. When the Cassini space probe visited Saturn in 2006, it confirmed a discovery that Voyager made back in 1981, a large hexagon at Saturn's north pole.
Like Saturn itself, this hexagon is enormous. Each side of Saturn's hexagon is 9,000 miles in length, and the clouds are estimated to be over 190 miles high.
Many astronomers believe that this bizarre feature is the result of an atmospheric wave pattern caused by differences in the densities and speeds of the atmosphere near Saturn's north pole.
The Cassini mission determined the rotation rate for the hexagon to be a little over 10 hours and 40 minutes.
Now that you know a little more about Jupiter and Saturn, let's check out that celestial game of lunar leapfrog. Okay, we have our skies set up for an hour before sunrise on Monday morning, April 22nd. The waning gibbous moon is just to the right of Jupiter and directly north of Antares, the heart of Scorpius the Scorpion.
The fun begins the following morning on April 23rd. Man, check out how close the moon is to Jupiter now.
On April 23rd, the moon will be a little over 1 degree, or 2 full moon widths away from Jupiter. Let's check it out on the 24th.
Now the moon is almost exactly halfway between Jupiter and Saturn, and right above the star Caus Borealis in the teapot of Sagittarius. Let's advance time one more day to the 25th.
Boom! Our second conjunction of the week. Just before sunrise, Saturn and the moon will be just over 2 degrees or 4 full moon widths apart. Definitely worth waking up early for.
So, to recap, let's check out that lunar leapfrog again. Here's the sky on the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Wow! So, get outside and gaze upon our nearest neighbor in space, the moon, playing leapfrog with the king of the Roman gods, Jupiter, and his dad, Saturn.
It's easy to do when you
Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And now back with today's Sea Ice Edge. You'll notice some new ice there in western parts of Norton Sound, just like we were talking about yesterday. The cold air and the wind blowing some of that into the water and over the water that's still primed and ready to make ice is making ice. It's not horribly thick, but the concentrations are up there, and you can see that new expanded area of white across the northern coast of the Yukon Delta into Norton Sound, and certainly along the western edge and south of Nome. We do have an area of more open water here west of Unalakleet, but we'll also notice some more filling into the ice there around St. Lawrence Island and into the Bering Strait. And for the very latest information, as well as sea surface temperatures and high-res images, you can check out weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. That's the Alaska Sea Ice Program. For southeast, look for southerlies working into the Lynn Canal. It'll be a little bit on the breezy side, but not as strong as they have been for today. 25 knots and 5-foot seas. They're northwesterlies in the Clarence Strait, bringing 3-foot seas to your area. Across the outer coast, winds coming onshore anywhere from 15 to about 20 knots. 9 to 10-foot seas there on Friday. As we get into Saturday, winds start coming up a little bit more. From the south, you're looking at 8 to about 10-foot seas with a southerly wind, 25 knots. Lynn Canal looking at 15 knots and 3-foot seas. And inside passage waters will be very similar with a south and southeasterly flow for your Saturday. For Friday in Prince William Sound, southerlies 20 knots, 4-foot seas there, a south and westerly flow across the northern Gulf, looking at about 20 to 30 knots. Most areas about 7 to 9-foot seas, 10-foot seas outside of Hitchinbrook entrance in the northern Gulf. For Cook Inlet, you're looking at about 25 knots up and down. Anywhere from 6 to 7-foot seas there with that south and westerly flow. It'll be a little bit stronger from the north and east on Saturday, 20 to 30 knots, 9 to 10-foot seas south of Kenai and Clam Gulch. As you get into the Barren Islands, an east and northeasterly flow, 10 to 11-foot seas there, and east and southeasterlies coming into Prince William Sound, 25 to 30 knots, 4-foot seas on the inside, and 10-foot seas on the outside. Bristol Bay looking at light westerlies coming in up to 20 knots by the end of the day. 5-foot seas down the coast, a little lighter wind there as you head down the Bering Sea coast. Across the Pacific waters, including Shelikof Strait, 15 to 20 knots should do the trick. 5 to 6-foot seas in most areas, 4-foot seas though outside of Sand Point. You'll see more of a northwesterly flow strengthening on Saturday, generally 20 to 35 knots in all areas. AKwx to Chignik, again, you'll be looking at some slightly stronger winds, anywhere from 8 to 10-foot seas there, and more of an onshore easterly flow coming into Kodiak and AKwx there from the Gulf Coast. You can see some higher seas just off to the east over the open water. Bristol Bay, 20 knots or so with 3 to 5-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast. For the chain, generally lighter winds, again, not the big strong winds with low pressure parked over you. Instead, it's high pressure off to your west with 20 knots to 25, let's say, across the central chain. And generally about 6 to 8-foot seas, 4-foot seas, though, south of Unalaska, and Nikolsky, 6-foot seas out in the west. For Saturday, not much of a change, more of a northwesterly shift here. You're looking at about 6 to 8-foot seas in most areas. and 20 to 25 knots in just about the entire length of the Aleutian chain for your Saturday. For the west coast, a northerly flow coming across Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, down toward Nunivak Island, 20 knots or so there with 4 to 7 foot seas. The higher seas generally around the St. Paul, St. George area there at 20 knots. Again, with that northerly flow continuing on Saturday, 15 knots inside of Norton Sound, 3 foot seas in the open waters, and northerlies from St. Lawrence Island down toward Nunivak Island, out toward the west, looking at about 5 to maybe even 6 foot seas a little bit further out into the water. On the north slope, east and northeasterly winds will be the rule. 20 to 25 knots should be expected as we go through your Friday. Again, that could cause a little bit of blowing snow, but visibility should not be too horrible. Northerly winds coming down the Chukchi coast and into Kotzebue Sound. Generally 20 knots will do the trick. A little bit more of a northwesterly flow as you round Point Hope into Kotzebue Sound, and northerlies for the Bering Strait communities there with 5 foot seas in the open water. And for Saturday, expect a little bit less wind across the Beaufort. Easterlies generally about 15 knots, 15 to 20 knots there for the north and west coast. Anywhere from about 15 to 20 coming into Kotzebue Sound as well. And for areas with a little bit of open water, 4 foot seas around the Bering Strait communities on that northerly 20 knot wind. Recapping tonight's weather, low pressure is still dragging colder air across the Alaska Peninsula and into the Gulf. Ahead of that, that means rainfall and wind for southeast. Rain and snow showers from Prince William Sound all the way down to Kodiak Island, and snow around south central up to the Alaska Range and into the interior. Snow is kind of winding down around the Fairbanks region. We expect it to wind up around the south central area, including the Anchorage hillside above 1,000 feet, maybe 2 to 5 inches of snow. Down below on the roads, maybe 1 to 2, and melting fairly quickly as usual. Out across the west, snow showers continue there tonight. You'll see more of that throughout Friday and into Saturday, with a trough of low pressure across the mountains there. Winds will start to pick up again across southeast as another wave of warm and wet air builds into the Gulf as we head into your Saturday and Sunday with a 993 millibar low. Watch for more rain and snow across the interior and south.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.